All right. Can you see my screen, Corey?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
All right. So exam two, it's 50 questions. You have 75 minutes. So go ahead and get started. So ethics. Ethics is the system of standards or moral principles that direct actions as being right or wrong, right? It's how people, either individually or as a group, um, decide what actions are right and wrong. If someone has the right to do something, if someone has the duty to do something. And then we look at personal versus professional ethics. So personal ethics provide personal guidelines for living, right? So we choose what our own personal code of ethics is, and that will also influence our nursing ethics. And then sometimes personal ethics conflict with like the state Nurse Practice Act. And we talked about this in class, right? We may have to work with clients um, that present with issues that may go against our personal ethics, right? But the goal there is to still provide quality, effective care to that client regardless. And if there is a conflict, right, where you don't feel that you can provide that care, then you can, discuss that with like your supervisor, to see if there's a possibility for a change of assignment, but that isn't always guaranteed, right? We still have to make sure that we're providing care. The ethical responsibilities of nurses, client advocacy, right? We deal with patients or clients on their best days, on their worst days, right? And making sure that we are advocating for their rights. When they, especially when they can't make those decisions for themselves, or care for themselves. When we look at accountability, taking accountability for your actions, when something goes wrong, when you make a mistake, making sure that we are taking responsibility for those. That brings us to colleague reporting. Colleague reporting, this can be if you catch somebody diverting narcotics for themselves, or not even, even not even providing quality care. One of the first things that you should do is notify your supervisor, if you witness or, know that a client is diverting or not going to provide care for a specific patient or for whatever reason. We report that to to our supervisor. And we talked about systems-based issues, new policies, new procedures, new equipment, all of that thing we should be provided with the appropriate training, in order to be able to use that equipment properly and appropriately. You never use a piece of equipment, right, that you have not been trained on, or don't know how to use. Our ethical preferences. So I'm going to ask questions. So non-maleficence means to do no harm. So, and then beneficence is to do good. Autonomy is your freedom to choose. It includes privacy. Fidelity includes HIPAA, and then justice. So autonomy. Give me an example of how we can help our clients be autonomous.
By giving them like all of the necessary information that they need so they can make like an informed decision and respecting whatever choice they make.
Exactly. That was perfect. Exactly. Right. We're going to give them all of the information to make an informed decision. And then once they make that decision, right, we accept that decision. So that, I think we talked about, like, a Jehovah Witness who doesn't want blood products, right? We can provide all the information as to why it could be beneficial and why they may need that blood product, but ultimately they have the right to deny that treatment. And then it's our job to just support that decision, right? It's not our job to convince them to do something that they don't want to do, right? It's just our job to support them in whatever decision they make. Justice, right, means providing the same care or being this, it's, being fair to all. It's doing what you would do for one client, you're going to do for another client. So more about autonomy. Again, thinking through all the facts, informed consent, informed decisions. Um, and, it's just like the person that refuses a medication, right? We can provide the education as to why they want to take the medication, the possible effects of not taking their medication, but then at the end, right, if they still refuse to take their medication, we just document it. It's not our job to force them to change their mind, right? It's just giving them the information so they can make that. Beneficent paternalism, we talked about this in class. This is a disrespectful attitude towards the client and what the client has to contribute to their personal care and their recovery, right? So it's an I know what's best for you attitude that discounts the client's self-knowledge, right? So just go ahead and do this because I said so, kind of an attitude. It can be used for good in emergency situations. So if, a parent is refusing life-saving treatments for a child, the provider can go, and the organization, the hospital can get a court order in order to provide that treatment to that child, especially in a life-saving situation. But generally, this is a disrespectful attitude, telling people what to do, except in those emergency situations. We've talked a lot about your Nurse Practice Act. Like I said that a lot in class. The state statutes that apply to licensed persons and situations in client care that could result in legal action. So where can you find that information? So always, your organizational rules and regulations, your obligations under the law, the professional groups, like for LPNs, you have NAPNEs, and then your state Nurse Practice Act. So your state Nurse Practice Act, that's that minimal competencies or it defines the minimal competencies for licensed practical nurses as well as RNs, nurse practitioners. The Nurse Practice Act is where you're going to find a lot of information about what you can and cannot do. So it's super important that you know that Nurse Practice Act. So minimal competencies, that is your Nurse Practice Act. So again, it's super important to know your scope of practice. If you haven't looked at your Nurse Practice Act, I suggest you pull it up under their State Board of Nursing so you know what to expect once you graduate and go out into practice. So here is some of the content under the Nurse Practice Act. So it functions at the State Board of Nursing. It'll do the general procedures, like how much is it, in fees, like how much is it to renew your license, to get your license. It outlines the licensure process. So what are the things that you need to do in order to get your license, right? First thing you start with, right, is your Board of Nursing application. The elements of unprofessional conduct. So what are some of the things that, could happen in practice or even out of, not in practice, what are some things that, you could go in front of the Board of Nursing for. Information related to reasons for a suspended or revoked license, and of course, the impaired professional program. Some of the responsibilities of the Board of Nursing, it outlines the general functions of the licensed nurse, whether you're an LPN or an RN. It gives a definition of nursing. So there's going to be different definitions for LPNs versus RNs. The standards of nursing conduct. The Board of Nursing also organizes, approves, and administers, overall administration of nursing programs. It also tells you what your requirements are for continuing education. So when you look at your licensure renewal, you may have continuing education credits that you may need to submit either with your application for renewal, or they may request that addition, after you've already submitted that. So State Board of Nursing functions, licensing and certifying, setting the fees, establishing the standards for educational programs, approved schools of nursing. So all the schools of nursing within your state need to be approved through the Board of Nursing. Determining the duration and renewal of license, right? So is it every year? Is it every 2 years? Is it every 3 years? And then of course, how many continuing education credits do you need to submit each year? Maintains an inactive status list. It carries out disciplinary actions, develops programs for impaired nurses, and then suspending and revoking licenses and dealing with the appeal process. Another thing too, on the Board of Nursing website, your information as a licensed nurse is public information. So your State Board of Nursing, anybody can go onto the State Board of Nursing website and look at your license to see if it's active. So they can pull you up. It'll give them your license number, of course, your name, the expiration date of your license, and then it will give a history if you have any board actions on your license. Even if the board action was dismissed, it will still show up on there. So again, your license number, any history of disciplinary action, and the expiration date are just the minimal requirements that will be on the Board of Nursing website. We also have the National Practitioner Database, like Nurses is one of them as well. All of that same information will be up there with the National Practitioner Database. That will be if there's any disciplinary action against a particular nurse's license. So some of the categories that can result in disciplinary actions: fraud, deceit, criminal activity, negligence, any violation of the Nurse Practice Act, if you've been disciplined by another jurisdiction, incompetence, any unethical conduct, and even your drug and alcohol abuse, right? So that's not just the impaired nurse who may be diverting medications, but that can be the nurse that came to work under the influence. And that puts patients as well as other staff members at risk. When we look at what happens if I do something wrong, so the disciplinary steps. So whoever, either your organization will file a complaint to the State Board of Nursing. The Board of Nursing will then review the complaint and start their investigation. Once we get to the board proceedings, that's where the nurse has the opportunity to respond. And then things they can be settled, they can go to a formal hearing, or in some cases, there's alternatives to discipline programs. So like the substance abuse monitoring program is one of them. Board actions, there can be emergent actions, which is an immediate suspension to protect the public pending a complete investigation, or there can be disciplinary action. then the disciplinary action is determined by the board itself. So there could be a fine, it could be a public reprimand, or it could be a limitation of practice, suspension, revocation, provisions for remediation, education, or monitoring. It depends on the situation and why the case is before the Board of Nursing. And then, of course, what your take on the situation was, and they'll make that recommendation from there. And then, like I said, reporting and enforcement. So anytime you have something that you go in front of the Board of Nursing for, and then you've received either um, I'm trying to think, a suspension or remediation, then that will be on your nursing license. And those are reported to the NERSIS, which is a national database for verifying license as well as disciplinary actions, and the National Provider Data Bank. The National Provider Data Bank's a data management system. It helps to track unfit healthcare practitioners and restrict the ability of incompetent professionals to move from state to state. So it's a national data bank. So even if you get licensed in one state with your multi-state license, you can work in other states. But this is a way to kind of track them to make sure that they're not trying to get licensed in another state, right, without disclosing any disciplinary measures. So again, talked about the verification, license number, expiration date of license, disciplinary actions. Those will be things that they can see when they pull your license up. The disciplinary actions will be outlined if they are there. It will tell them what the discipline, what you went in front of the board for, and what the recommendations were. Any questions so far?
So far, no. You said that we could also look up the doctor's license on that same app.
Yeah, in some cases, like I know for example, for like Virginia Board of Nursing, doctor's information is up there as well. It just
Okay.
depends on how it's set up. When we look at legal liability, we have criminal and civil. Criminal is government versus individual. So these are felony or misdemeanor charges like your homicides, homicides, larceny, embezzlement. Civil is individual versus individual. So there's some sort of an infringement on individual rights, which usually results in monetary compensation. It also includes your torts. Your liability is just being responsible for something. With nursing, it's associated with civil law, and it includes your contracts, your negligence, and intentional and unintentional torts. So negligence is the most common type of negligence in practical nursing is action or lack of action. So not what was intended to be done. So this is where there's 4 elements that are needed to prove negligence. That was your duty, your breach of duty, your damages, and your proximate cause. So duty, that's your responsibility to provide care in an acceptable way. So we as nurses have duty based on our education as well as the policy and procedures of the organization that we are employed. Breach of duty means that we didn't adhere to the standard of care. So either we didn't do something we were supposed to do, or we did something incorrectly. And an expert nurse witness establishes that standard of care. Damages mean that the client must be able to show that the nurse's negligent act injured him or her in some way, whether it was an act of omission or an act of commission. The client has to be able to prove damages. And then proximate cause means that there's a reasonable cause and effect relationship can be shown between the omission or commission of the nursing act and the harm. Did the nurse's negligent act cause the injury in question? Right? So you have a client with hypertension, you didn't give them their blood pressure medication and they had a stroke. Is there a proximate, is there a reasonable cause and effect relationship there? Did that negligent act cause the stroke, right? So they have to be able to prove that there was a cause and effect. Battery is causing physical harm to somebody, and assault is a threat, right? So battery is you're actually physically harm somebody. Assault, you're threatening to harm them, but physically did not touch them. Chemical versus, physical restraints. So medications, right? You go to work and, you overhear a nurse saying, hey, I'm going to just give everybody all my patients sleeping pills so they sleep through the night. Okay. That would be an example of a chemical restraint. A physical restraint would be your wrist restraints. In other situations, depending on the area of practice that you're working in, it could be putting a table in front of, somebody that so that they can't, move freely throughout their room. Libel and slander. Slander is spoken, libel is written. So libel, like writing a letter to the editor of a newspaper or posting on social media, those would be examples of libel. Slander is verbal. So steps for bringing legal actions. So the client believes the nurse has violated their rights. The client's going to go find an attorney. And then the attorney is going to have a nurse expert expert review the chart to see if the nurse has violated the nursing standard of care. If it is determined that a standard of care has been violated, that's when the lawsuit is filed. The client will then file a complaint that documents the grievance, and that will be served to the nurse or the defendant. And then the defendant will respond in writing. And then the pretrial stuff begins. That's where they get statements, they get witnesses, the nurse expert, the client, other caregivers, as well as the policy and procedures of the organization. And then during the trial, all the information is presented to a judge or jury, and then the verdict is reached. And then the plaintiff or the client is the one that has the burden of proof, right? They are the ones, again, that need to show that whatever the act was is what caused that specific harm. And so the award in a malpractice case is to make the aggrieved person whole, and it generally is going to be a monetary settlement. There is always a possibility of an appeal. So an appeal, which is a request for another trial, can be made if either the plaintiff or the defendant doesn't consider the verdict acceptable. Basically, they didn't agree with the verdict, so they're going to appeal and try to get a different outcome. The patient care partnership. So the American Hospital Association developed the Patient Bill of Rights, which was revised and renamed the Patient Care Partner, understanding expectations, rights, and responsibility. It's more of an ethical rather than a legal document for hospitals, recommending ways to guarantee clients' rights. It also encourages the client to be participant in their care through collaboration with their providers. And one of the best ways that we can prevent, right, this legal action is developing a really good therapeutic, building a rapport with our clients, getting that therapeutic relationship established, that having, well, I just can't say enough, like having a rapport with your clients, is really, helps to, increase their participation in care, as well as, build that two-way communication between you and your clients. HIPAA is your Health Information Portability and Accountability Act. So of course, the main focus of HIPAA was privacy. Um, the client can file a complaint if they think their privacy has been violated. So HIPAA does require that all covered entities designate a privacy officer. So if a client feels like that their rights have been violated or their information has been leaked, whatever the situation is, then we can give that information about or we can give the information like who the privacy officer is, so that they can contact the privacy officer. The privacy officer can then do an investigation to see if their information has been leaked or violated. And that notice of privacy practices also gives that information. But again, some people don't read them, but we can always give out that privacy officer's information. Everybody gets a notice of privacy practices, and you notice that even when you go to the doctor's office, every year they give you a copy of those privacy practices. It's just one of the requirements. So what information can you give out? So clients have a right to a copy of their medical records as well as to review the records upon request. And then each facility determines the conditions the records can be reviewed. So, again, as nurses, our goal is to protect the client's information and privacy. So name, address, payer information are appropriate for the nurse to disclose to a vendor delivering supplies to a client's residence. So let's say you have a client that's being discharged and they need durable medical equipment or they need home health care, whichever. When you're setting up those services, you can provide their name, you can provide their address, and you can also provide that company with their insurance information, so that they can deliver the equipment, whatever it is, to their home. They also know who they're billing the equipment to. Informed consent must be obtained for invasive procedures, either therapeutic or diagnostic. And so, let's say you go to the emergency room. All right, to go to the emergency room, you have a headache, you sign consent when you go into the emergency room, right? That says that you're accepting the care that they're providing. If there's an invasive procedure that needs to be done, you're going to have to sign a separate consent. So let's say you have to have an IV with contrast, or you have to have a Foley catheter, whatever they need. Any invasive procedures, it has to have an additional consent signed. So when we look at informed consent's all the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So it includes the diagnosis or the suspected diagnosis, because we may be running that test because we don't know what the diagnosis is yet. The purpose and the description of the treatment. Why are they doing it? Right? So maybe we're doing it to diagnose a condition or find out what's going on with the client, as well as a description of the treatment. What does the process entail? What does the procedure entail? What's going to happen? The expected outcomes, the expected benefits, and the possible side effects or complications. All right, so the good, the bad, and the ugly. What could happen during this procedure? What are alternative treatments? So maybe I don't want to have the CT with contrast. What's another option? Or I don't want to have the surgical procedure. What's another option? So all the, explanation of alternative treatments, whatever those benefits are, the side effects or complications of those treatments are, and then the name and the qualifications of the people who will perform the procedure. Prognosis, if treatment is not done, answers to questions, and explanation that the client has the right to revoke written permission at any time. So you go in and let's say the client's going to have surgery. The surgeon comes in, he explains the procedure to the client, and he goes out, and you go in to have the client sign the informed consent, and the client says, wait a minute, I don't understand this part of the procedure. Okay, we don't explain that part of the procedure. We go back and we get the surgeon, we have the surgeon come back in and explain that procedure. If the client doesn't know who's going to be performing the procedure, then we are going to we need to get that information. All of the good, bad, and ugly, who's going to do it, everything is in that informed consent. If there's any questions, then we don't let them sign the informed consent. We go back and get the provider and have them clarify the information, including who's going to perform the procedure. Advanced directives. So we have living wills, we have durable power of attorneys. So living will is a legal document that describes the kind of medical treatments or life-sustaining treatments the person would or would not want if seriously or terminally ill. It does not specify a person to make healthcare decisions. So let's just say somebody, they're setting up their living will. Maybe in the event that they have a major trauma or a heart attack, whatever the issue is, they can decide right then and there, like while they're healthy and well, what they want done in the event something happens. So do they want CPR? Do they want IV fluids, oxygen therapy, tube feeding, right? What is it that they're willing to accept? A durable medical power of attorney is a legal document that's valid in all 50 states. It names a healthcare proxy. Okay, that person must be at least 18 years or older to make medical decisions if the client is no longer able to speak for himself or herself. Okay, so this is someone that you trust, that maybe you've discussed your healthcare concerns with, and your decisions with, and in the event that you're not able to make decisions for yourself, this person will make those healthcare decisions for you. Your DNR, or do not resuscitate order, is an advanced directive based on the Patient Self-Determination Act that gives a physician legal permission to write such an order. So this is a special order that is placed in the client's chart, and that we respect that order. If family members don't disagree with the DNR order, we put it in the chart. We follow that DNR order because that was what the client's wishes were. Removal of life support. So the physician must pronounce the client dead and document the status before the nurse turns off a ventilator. Failure to wait for this determination and documentation can be considered an act of murder and is both illegal and unethical. So somebody has a DNR and they have passed away. They've been maybe on a, for whatever reason, once the physician pronounces them dead, that's when we can remove all of the support measures. Those measures cannot be removed until that physician has signed off on that.
I
So
got one quick question. I'm sorry.
Yep.
With the license verification, do we have the address, our date of birth, or is just only the expiration date and any disciplinary action?
So for the nurses reporting, it is your name, it's your license number, and so it's your name, your license number, your expiration date, and well, I say name, but yeah, and any disciplinary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
In some states, and I don't want to confuse you, some states can put the addresses on there, but with the national database, they do not. It is just
Okay.
the license number the expiration and any disciplinary action.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So what are some unethical acts? Giving a client a higher than prescribed dose of medication, accepting bribes, administering CPR to a client with the DNR would be some examples. And then we talked about leadership styles. So you're democratic, right? That's the one that's kind of in the middle. It balances concerns with tasks and employee. You're laissez-faire, more laid back, right? They're more concerned with the employee. When the autocratics are more concerned with the task, right? And so we talked about like democratic kind of takes, feedback from everybody, right? And tries to work with that information so everybody can get, involved in the process. Autocratic is more gonna kind of just, it's like an order. This is what you're gonna do, right? And that type of style is really good. We talked about in emergency situations, right, where somebody needs to take charge. And we talked about delegation versus assignment. Assignment, that is, the typical work that you are expected to do when you go to work. Right? These activities are consistent with your job description, and your legal scope of practice, your educational background. Whereas delegation is the transfer of that responsibility for an activity from one person to another. But whoever the delegator is going to retain the accountability for the outcome, right? So if I decide to delegate vital signs, right, um, even though I've delegated that to a UAP to go get my vital signs, I'm still ultimately responsible for those vital signs being done correctly. Before you delegate, the client must be assessed. All right, so there we, are going to only delegate to a stable client. A CNA or a UAP cannot delegate. And then delegation once accepted, it can't be transferred, right? So that's why I was saying earlier, or I said in class, I asked the CNA to go get vital signs, and then that CNA goes to another CNA to go get those vital signs, right? So once that UAP accepts the delegation, they can't transfer it to another person. They need to complete the task. Can refuse to be delegated, they can refuse a delegated task, okay? For proper delegation, they have to voluntarily accept the task that's being delegated. And if they refuse delegation, ask them why. Kind of try to figure out what the reason is that they don't want to perform that task. Whether if it's, they don't feel comfortable performing the task, right? Then we can, provide some education, but really want to know why they refuse the task. So the rights of delegation, the right task, the right circumstances, the right person, the right directions and communication, the right supervision and evaluation. So again, even though you're delegating the task to another person, you are still ultimately responsible for that task to be completed and to be reported back to you. So some routine tasks that we can delegate to our nursing assistants or our UAPs, of course, the personal care, your hygiene, your toileting, your dressing rooming, feeding and hydration, basic restorative skills, so transferring, positioning, ambulation, measuring and recording vital signs, height and weight, INOs. They can assist with elimination, including catheter care, maintaining safety factors, so your fall preventions, applications of heat and cold, infection prevention measures, collecting samples, especially stool urine. Things that we don't delegate it, sterile techniques. So nursing assistants do not have training in sterile technique. So any procedures that would require sterile technique, we cannot delegate those tasks, right? So we're not gonna have them insert a Foley catheter, or something along those lines. Crisis situations, right? Again, we are only going to delegate to stable patients, not unstable patients. And then although nursing assistants can collect simple data, they're not trained to make decisions or interpret that data, right? So they may know that that blood pressure is really high, but that is not within their scope. Okay. Same thing with glucose levels. They need to bring that information back to you to make the decision about whether it needs to be rechecked or the patient needs to be evaluated. Duties that are not part of your legal scope of practice may never be delegated, right? So this is why you need to know your Nurse Practice Act, what you can and cannot do, what your CNAs can and cannot do within your individual state. I talked about this. What do we do if if delegation is refused? Because they have the right to refuse. Why are they refusing? Feeling unqualified is a training problem. Okay, so if they don't feel comfortable, collecting INOs or, getting a glucose or taking a blood pressure, right? That's a training problem, right? We need to bring them back in. We need to educate them and let them practice. Not wanting to do an activity is an attitude problem, right? So there's a difference. Unqualified training and then not wanting to do an activity is an attitude problem. Change of shift report. We talked about SBAR and communication. But it's a baseline report. It's a quick visit of each resident comparing the status with the status reported at change of shift. Again, you're going to consider the scope of practice of the person you are giving report to. Are you giving a report to another LPN? Are you giving a report to an RN? Always use your SBAR. I'm just going to say that. And then the last part was how can LPNs increase their job employment opportunities? And so we talked about these in class, right? Getting certifications. So there are certifications like your IV certification, the long-term care certification, wound care certification, that you are potentially eligible to get. Attending seminars, taking leadership courses, in-service programs, networking is key as well. And then books and articles. So look at some of the professional journals within the area that you are working in, and that helps keep you up to date with current practice. All right, any questions?
No.
Kaylee, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
All right. All right, guys. That is it then. Y'all have a great night.
Thank you. You have
you.
a good night.
Thank you. Bye.